we shall see. I'm going to double check now on my chat on my phone, which I'll be checking periodically. So let's take a look here. I'm going to see if I can refresh this. And then I will be generally checking down to see if y'all are chatting in my stream. And then any writing questions or whatever, come by and say hey. I'll sort of check down to see if you're saying anything and I'll respond. Definitely say hi if you stop by from any of the social media streams or anything like that. And say hello, tell me who you are and where you're coming in from. So today we're going to end up talking about one of my favorite things when it comes to writing, which is world building. Right now we're in quarantine in Southern California, so I've had plenty of time to work on my writing, and the number one thing that a writer wants to do when they have plenty of time to work on their writing is start something completely brand new rather than working on their old projects. I'm sorry, old projects. So I started a cyberpunk sort of crime thriller called The Tiger, the Tutor, and the Delivery Girl. It's about three broke siblings that sort of owe a mafia don in the future on their parents' restaurant, and their parents have disappeared long ago, and they think that they've been long dead, and they're still kind of being squeezed for this debt at this point. I'm working on this right now sort of periodically. I'm trying to do it like, every 2-day updates. And right now I'm just going to go ahead and do some research so I can sort of fill my mental bank with some like really nice visuals and really cool research. And I'm going to show you my process. I'm just going to give you a little sort of insight on it. And hopefully you guys enjoy it. It's something that I'm trying out, and streaming to try to keep me more accountable to write more and do more world building, do more research more often. And I definitely don't mind doing it on camera because, you guys are sort of keeping me to it. So let's take a look here. I'm also going to make sure that I have sort of the chat popped up just in case. All right. Please excuse my rudeness here. All right, so I think we're all set up now. So you don't need anything special to strap in and do this, to do world building. All you need, I'll show you sort of your ingredients here if you want to do the Rachel Ray version. The number one ingredient you're going to want is your buddy. Just kidding, you don't need this. This is optional, but this definitely makes things easier. This is wine. Sometimes I do tea. So what we're going to do is I'm going to show you sort of my process here. All right. So this right here is what I have laid out. I have my Medium page laid out. These are sort of the stories and the excerpts of the story that I have already published here, just so I can sort of go back and really look at what I've done here. Right now there are 4 parts up. They're super short. I'm trying not to stress myself out even further by expecting myself to write like the next great American novel while in quarantine. It doesn't have to be a Shakespeare play. It's just keeping you writing, keeping the muscle going. And the best part about that is that you do get to world build if you want to do research and you have all this time on your hands. So let's take a quick look here. Let me know if the music is too loud, chat, or if the audio is too soft. That's definitely a problem I've had before, so let me know. So my favorite tools here, besides the wine, are going to be pretty interesting. It's Pinterest. Here's my Pinterest board for the Tiger, Tutor, and Delivery Girl aesthetics. Here is some CNN Business, an ad from CNN Business. Thanks, guys. And also some edition.cnn at business. So what's really cool about reading the news and sort of keeping on top of new technology that comes out is that you end up finding out really incredible stuff. Like right now there is a doctor, I believe she's a doctor at architecture. I could be wrong about that. And she's working on making living buildings that could basically suck out a city's carbon emissions and output them as regular oxygen using a sort of specific molecule. Her name is Dr. Richard Armstrong. I definitely recommend you look up some of her stuff. I've been really inspired by what she's doing since like 2010, 2011, her research started, I believe, in making these molecules that could be programmed to eat certain toxins out of the ocean and out of the air. And it's really sort of inspired when I'm trying to, the sort of tone and a world building aspect that I'm trying to do, which is sort of like a grunge solarpunk. And some people might not know what solarpunk is. It's sort of like a word I learned recently too. Let me show you visually what that is. Solarpunk is sort of like a nicer take on cyberpunk. It's not as dark and neon. It has a lot to do more with like nature and nature buildings. Sort of living in tandem with plants and animals. Trying to do a little better with what we did to the earth before. It's a really beautiful aesthetic. It's a little too sort of lighthearted for what I'm going for, especially because the tone is sort of thriller and crime related. And in my mind, a lot of this stuff would be happening, of course, in a city of the future. A lot of people are doing a lot of legislation to save the earth and to do these sorts of things. But I just don't think that I don't think that poor communities would be sort of benefiting from these sorts of legislation or buildings at first. And because I'm writing about, a family that is, below the poverty line and sort of living in a slum and sort of at the sort of whims of a crime lord, like a feudal style crime lord in a really poor community in the future, I don't think that it would be this lighthearted and this sort of bright and beautiful. I think that these things would be happening in their world. I don't think that they would be that accessible at first. Possibly if they worked for people who were wealthy, or they worked for people who worked in the government, maybe they would have access to these sorts of areas, and that would be really beautiful to explore the difference between where they're living and what's happening in the world. And I definitely want to explore that at some point in the future. But right now, what I was going for with visuals is sort of like a dark solarpunk or like a grunge solarpunk. So it's going to be something along the lines of like, there are going to be plants, there are going to be superstructures, but they're going to be kind of at first run down when you first see them in the world. There's going to be some things talked about in the world that look like this right here. And I'm going to be talking about the Seawall in LA. I'm using LA and Los Angeles and the greater Los Angeles area as sort of the setting for this cyberpunk tale. That's pretty classic. I just wanted to try a new take on it, which was not so super crowded and not so dark and dingy in a like packed together Kowloon sort of way, a new Kowloon sort of way, which is what people reach for a lot when they do cyberpunk. I wanted to do something that was a lot more organic. So I wanted to talk about seawalls. I wanted to talk a lot about sort of the change and the step away from inland farming in California and Los Angeles and the greater area, and sort of the step towards eating artificial meat to be able to feed, the growing population, and also kelp farming, vertical kelp farming. I'm talking about, a seawall that they built because of the sort of rising sea levels, and I describe it because I really like this image itself, and I pulled from it itself. I describe a sort of like concrete seawall that's a honeycomb structure. And inside, people of the future in this universe are sort of rebuilding coral reefs, so sort of create the bone of the seawall so it can't be eradicated and blown down and like eroded away so easily. And they do a lot of farming in hatches inside the wall as well. So I thought that was really interesting because, moving to California from New York, I never thought living in a suburb made me a city slicker, but I definitely have had my head turned around in a lot of ways, moving out into not Los Angeles, but in Ventura County, where a lot of farming happens. A lot of farming also happens in Orange County, to my knowledge, as well. But I live here in Ventura, and we get to see the strawberry season blossom, which smells incredible. Oranges, jasmine, a lot of really, really beautiful flowers that go to like places like Lowe's and stuff like that, Home Depot, and a lot of cannabis. And sometimes we drive through fields and fields of it, and it is like heady aroma. You could smell it coming through the air conditioning sometimes, even if you have the windows rolled up. So yeah, like seeing agriculture happen and seeing the people who run agriculture, the people who make it happen, those people are not wealthy people. Those people are just folks that are just living above the poverty line, working really, really hard in blue-collar labor jobs. And a lot of the time you don't see them. So I kind of wanted to talk about those folks in a cyberpunk scenario, like kelp farmers, people upholding the seawall, people working in sort of unseen infrastructure like garbage men of the future. I wanted to talk about stuff like that because, yeah, it's cool to write about hackers and it's cool to write about like future millionaires, and that's all well and good, but what if you wrote about all of those people in like a Parasite scenario? I don't know if you guys have seen Parasite. It's an incredible film that just won an Oscar, I believe, or two, and it's really about an entire family that is sort of not burgeoned, but sort of brought down by an incredible poverty that they're suffering from, and their son is trying to lift them out of that poverty by getting the entire family hired by a very wealthy family who unknowingly hires the entire family as a group and employs them, and obviously some things go amok. So yeah, in that style, I wanted to sort of look at the people trying to run this world. During this outbreak, we have really seen this strange turnout of people who are really running the world. It's not the wealthy turning out in their yachts, like they're self-quarantining out in the Caribbean. They're not helping. And it's not banks sort of bailing us out. It's people working at grocery stores that choose to show up to their job because they need the money, people who are still doing childcare, people who are still, working delivery trucks, Amazon, mail people, upholding our infrastructure, not because they're super heroic, and they are just in what they're doing, but because they need the money, because they don't have a choice to not go to work. So I'm thinking about those folks. What would they be doing in a future that like sort of doesn't care about them, but they have to make ends meet anyway. So that's how I ended up making these three siblings who are sort of indebted to their parents' loan shark, and sort of moving through this world of poverty. Who do they know? Are they dealing with farmers and kelp farmers? Like, are they delivering to these people? Are they dealing with sex workers? Are they dealing with drivers? Are they dealing with late night food service professionals, delivery people? I may have said that already. Folks that you don't really see. You don't really see in the world day to day, because they're sort of quietly doing their job, making sure that the world is running like it should. And also, you don't really see a lot in media. I think that Cyberpunk a lot of the time is shiny, it's beautiful, and it's sort of sleek, and it's gritty in terms of like it's grapples with drug use and stuff like that, and body modification, and that stuff is really beautiful to deal with, especially with the trans community. But what you don't talk about enough in the future is poverty, and and the working class. I would really love to sort of delve more into that theme and really think up what it would mean to have to live your life in a future that has probably 1 million more people, probably a lot more sprawling to get to a city center, a lot farther away from the resources that you need. What would that mean? And what sort of solutions have we come up with, or could we come up with, so to speak? So that has been really cool to explore, especially when it comes to reading things like this. Singapore is currently doing this sort of project called the Super Tree Urban Oasis, and you may have seen this in Planet Earth. They mention it. This is where I heard about it, and I was really inspired to see it. And this really seems like a sort of urban playground of the future. What these super trees do is that it's a 250 acre green development in sort of their Bay Area, and they're an artificial canopy of trees. And what they do is that they actually they conduct solar energy, and they draw it into the water aqueducts below them. And they also provide shade because they have actual plants and vines growing off of them. So the people walking below, it's many degrees cooler than it is in the general city because of this shade and the greenery around it. And it also helps with pollution as well. These are really beautiful. I'm not sure. This is not the greatest picture of them at night because they're really gorgeous. They light up in this sort of neon way that I really loved. So let's take a quick look if we can. And what's cool is that you can pull from these things. You can, here we go. This is really beautiful. You can use these things to sort of jetpack your imagination, it's not against the rules to use things that are happening right now to sort of drive the engine of your science fiction, because a lot of the time some of the most clever sci-fi writers are doing exactly this. William Gibson has literally talked about this in articles about his writing. People think that William Gibson has prophetic powers, and they've interviewed him and they're like, how do you do it? How did you do it, William? And he's like, so I read the news and then I go, what do I think is going to happen next based on the news? And then I write that. And sometimes it happens. And then people were like, whoa. But that's something you can do too. It's not just a William Gibson only tactic. It's a technique that you can pull from, and you can find a lot of really incredible things. It's sort of impossible to know everything that's happening in your era all over the world all at once. So it really behooves you as a science fiction writer, if that's what you want to be, or like a dystopian writer or whatever, if you're writing about the future, if you're writing about Afropunk, read about what's happening in that community right then and now, and then read about what's happening in a different community parallel across the world. It's cool to see what people in America are doing with their climate change initiatives, but what are people in Singapore, for instance, doing? What are people doing in Malaysia? There's a lot of really incredible things happening in Denmark, in the Netherlands, so it's really interesting to explore these things and see what people could be doing. For instance, I believe I read another sort of article off of CNN Business about, I believe these were people in Denmark. They were scientists, and they sort of want to make in this sort of a city in Denmark, in this unmarked patch of land that hasn't been used in a while. They want to make a supermarket farm where you can literally drive in and sort of everything that you buy out of that supermarket is grown right then and there, in your city. And that's it blew my mind because it's super simple, but it's also really interesting. Why wouldn't you want to do that with the sort of land that you have available? Especially if it's healthiest to eat fresh, if it's healthiest to sort of grow what you can grow right then and there without having to freeze, transport, unfreeze, prepackage, flash freeze, all of that gross business, waste plastic, waste gas, fossil fuels. If you could just grow it right then and there, wouldn't that be better? Wouldn't it taste better? Things to think about. Things to think about in your future world. Like if your future cyberpunk dystopia, or doesn't have to be a dystopia, it could just be a cyberpunk world. In your cyberpunk solarpunk world, for instance, what do your ramen shops look like? If you are growing scientifically altered rutabagas, or if you could just grow fish cakes in a vat, what would they look like? Would they be differently colored? Would they be insane colors because people of the future just want to eat stuff that looks like plastic, candy? What would people want? What does candy look like in the future in your world? What do people value? In my particular universe, people really like clubbing. They really like partying. So the wealthy have these sort of these mansions, these sort of cathedrals to psychedelics, where everything is ethereally beautiful on purpose, and it's not because it's become that way. It's because it's been crafted that way, because everything is a curated experience for the wealthy. So the characters Lyle and his sisters Kim and Jules end up coming across these folks and doing these things, and they're in these beautiful, unbelievably gorgeous cathedrals that are they look like passages to heaven, but really they're just very carefully crafted living spaces and third spaces for these people to just enjoy themselves without having to worry about anything. It's pretty interesting to think about. It sort of also sets up a really interesting dynamic between being able and having the ability to and the luxury to be somewhere like here, but also being a person who has to live somewhere here. Two things can exist at once, because they do right now. You can explore those things, and it's really interesting if you do, especially if you have characters moving between those spaces as well. Like what if our characters grew up somewhere like here? That's not very fancy. It's sort of crumbling infrastructure, crumbling sort of like pre-made funeral pyres for poor people. Like one wire fire could just put the whole building up into smoke. It makes you think about, what are these people concerned about day to day? How do these people live? Like, do these people have to deal with bugs in their apartment, or in their living quarters? Like, how small are they? Do they welcome plants into their living quarters? What do they look like? Are they sort of dingy? Are they run down? Is there a lot of plant life? Is it wet? Do people have a lot of hydroponic gardens where they're living just to provide food for themselves? These are all questions you can ask yourself based on just little crumbs, and you can sort of pick up those crumbs visually and like give yourself more to go on by just searching and researching. Pinterest is a great place to sort of pick up and make boards for yourself to sort of come back to and then write from. I found these really, really good prompts. I'm a very visual person. I'm just a writer who sort of straps in and then just tries their best to sort of keep up while my fingers are typing the movie in their head. So I these pictures really help me because they are giving me little sort of jetpacks to go from. So yeah, so you can look for things like these. These things already exist, and you can sort of jump off and make them even more sci-fi or more futuristic. But yeah, let's see if I could pull out some really good things here that I really liked. Right, so things like this are already happening on the planet. There are already architects that are building. So this particular company, Concept Circle of Life, they obviously look like they have sort of a copyrighted method of like construction that, as you can see, it looks like they have plants growing out of their structure. This is incredible. I mean, think about going to a restaurant and like the restaurant is in a building that it's a living building, it's a living and breathing, it's got plants in it. Yeah, would that be cool, or would there be a lot of bugs in it? Would it be kind of annoying but really beautiful to look at? You can write about that. Use everything as a crumb and describe things, use these things. You can use these little elements to power your writing, and they make it feel like you're really there, and that's valuable. So yeah, that's what I've been sort of working on recently. Yeah, definitely check this sort of stuff out. Do research. Try to sort of look into these things and use them as springboards for your writing, and then just do writing sprints based on these sort of little worlds that you've created, because it's a really valuable place to be in a headspace. And it's also, you don't have to write for a long time in these world building scenes. Sometimes it's really just the nugget that you need to get your story started, and then you could find your story there. If you're unsure or you're blocked or whatever, you can always return. If you find yourself dried up and you don't know how to write more about your world, just go back to Pinterest. Just do a little bit more searching through your board that you've created for yourself, and then sort of build up your visual vocabulary again to return to your story. And it's okay if those things change. Your story can change on a dime. That's what editing's for. So with that, it looks like I may very well sign off. Thank you so very much for tuning in. If you have, I'll probably be posting this video later on at some point on YouTube in its entirety, probably with louder audio because it's always quiet when it comes to me. I'm sorry. And I'll see you guys later. Thanks for tuning in, and have a wonderful, safe quarantine. Stay safe, y'all. Bye.